This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
And this is Father Jacob-Bertrand Janczyk.
And welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all of those who support us. If you enjoy this show, please consider making a monthly donation on our Patreon. Be sure to like, subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcast. Father Jacob-Bertrand, welcome back to us.
Thanks. I've not gone anywhere.
I know, right?
I've been here. I'm here. Don't worry.
It's all good.
I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
We're back at it. Yeah. So we are airing this episode in early September. I believe September 5th is the air date on this episode.
I think so. Is that
which
today?
means it is the day after my mother's birthday. So happy birthday, Mom. Love
it's
you.
It's almost my mom's birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Are both our moms born in September?
Yes.
Let's go.
And we're both born in December.
Look at that.
Golly. Yeah.
Shucks. So as we start this great, glorious month of September, most people think May is the month of mothers, but for us, actually, September is the month of our mothers, which is beautiful.
Correct. But if you ask my mom, she would probably say that every month is her month.
That's right. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Mother Teresa.
Oh, gosh.
My mom's name is Teresa. Some people ironically call her.
Do. Yeah.
She's great.
Yeah. We love her. And so this month of September, the month of our mothers, is also gearing up for the fall. So now you've been in New Hampshire for a few years now.
Yeah.
Talk to me
how
about
you count.
Yeah, I don't know how to count actually.
No, I mean, it's my second assignment there. So that's
true.
So this time around, it's my third fall, entering into fall number 3.
Wow. So talk to me about New Hampshire fall. What does that look like? What's your favorite part of it?
That's a good question. So, like, growing up, I grew up in Connecticut, which is still New England, like New Hampshire, but it's southern New England, so it's quite different. So, like, summers are noticeably more warm, and then living in DC for almost a decade, obviously summers are even warmer. So, like, my looking forward to the fall was always like, oh, it's not miserable outside anymore, or kind of miserable in Connecticut. I mean, Connecticut was fine, but New Hampshire doesn't have, like, the summers are really nice in New Hampshire. So like my thing with the fall was always like the anticipation of like the cooler weather, you're not, but it's not so much that. So, because the summers aren't so intense. So what do I like about fall? I like early fall until like daylight savings hits in New Hampshire. Yeah, it gets chilly. I just like the chilly weather. We're lucky enough in our house in our community in New Hampshire to have a fireplace in our house, which is awesome. You've experienced it yourself.
It's beautiful. It is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time in front of the fireplace in the fall and the winter. So I like that. I would say that's like what I'm anticipating most right now.
All right. Love that. That's good. Any you don't like the color of the trees as they change? I fully expected that.
I mean, it's pretty, but it's also like, it's one of those things. Like, even, again, I'll use like DC, like living in DC for a decade, people talk about when they come to visit, they want to see the monuments and stuff. It's like we drive by the monuments all the time, and like, it's like in your backyard. So it's pretty for sure. But it's like there, you know what I mean? So it's not like terribly special in that sort of way. But it's lovely.
Father Jacob-Bertrand, there is something that I know both of us have experienced multiple times, whether that's in the confessional or in pastoral counseling situations. It's something where we engage with a lot of people when we've heard this phrase, like, Father, I'm doubting, or I have doubts. And that kind of engagement is extremely common. Yeah. Like, it's really, really common to hear. But when you are dealing with somebody and that comes up and that kind of boils over to the surface, that they're struggling, they have doubts in the faith or something along those lines, what is your initial response? What is your initial take on it? And how do you deal with it?
Yeah. So how do I deal with it? I guess worth addressing first of like from whether it's in the confessional or conversation or what, like the setting. For me, I like to kind of distinguish in my own mind that establishes like two different routes or tacks or approaches in responding. And the first, and that has to do with like, what is the content of that person's doubt, or like what is the doubt in response to, I guess, to put it in that way. And on the one hand, and this might be less like properly doubt, but often it's something I think you could also affirm like that we engage or experience or contact in these like settings. But it's a doubt with respect to like a teaching or dogma of the faith. We could think here of like people when, especially like Protestant converts, or as they're coming toward like doubt about like our relationship to Mary, and like, what does that look like?
Right.
I don't know, or that's like what, that sort of stuff. I don't know about this teaching, and that can be totally like, I don't know. What's the opposite of hostile? Like totally open to like, okay, I want to learn, but I'm not sure, or like, I believe the church is wrong in this, and blah blah blah. Like, so you can run the whole spectrum there. But that's one way. Okay, well, this is more about like a teaching of a truth, than it is a sort of like spiritual engagement kind of thing. So the other one, and probably more properly doubt. So you have one a doubt with respect to a teaching or something of that nature, and the second with respect to God himself. And this comes again in like the other, in a whole host of forms and varieties, right? Like I doubt that God exists, or like my faith is weak, or I doubt that God is like listening to my prayers, or like whatever it might be, or even like I have doubts about like whether or not this sin will be conquered in my life. Like that kind of world, I think, is very different than like the sort of dogma world. I mean, they're two things, but in my mind, when I would approach those differently, where one is an engagement with like an intellectual truth, and the other is an engagement, I would say, or let's say engagement with an intellectual truth, and like an encounter with God. Like how are we encountering God, his love for us, his mercy, that sort of thing. I don't know if that makes sense, or if that's too like splicey, but
I kind of appreciate the distinctions as like, okay, a doubt in the doctrine versus a doubt in God proper.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the doubt in doctrine, like, that's where growth in faith is important, to that faith is a virtue that is given to us. And so to ask the Lord, like, oh, I may struggle with this teaching. I may not agree with it, or I may doubt the validity of it, but I want to be open to growing in it. And that's a growth of faith. That's a growth in the virtue of faith, and which is a gift, and to ask the Lord to help us in that, and to move in that way. But that takes a lot of just kind of, I don't know, it's a growth of faith in the intellect in that way, maybe. And I find the other distinction though, but doubting with God proper, like, okay, now we're dealing with a totally different thing. That's a broken relationship. Right. There's a lack of trust there. There's doubt in some capacity. And so that takes a totally different approach now, and to move the person into a deeper encounter where they do have trust in the one. Maybe they don't understand it totally, but they do believe and trust the reality, and they're not skeptical of it, or they don't doubt it. So that might be another issue to talk about, is like, is there a difference between like maybe skepticism and doubt?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the skepticism, like when you were explaining that word popped into my mind too, of skepticism. And when you're talking about on that first category, that this is a thing of faith in the sense of like believing what is true. It's also, I see it too, actually, and this isn't like, I see it a bit differently. I see it more as an issue of obedience than I do. Not that faith isn't involved, but like as Catholics, we're called to be obedient. We're called to be obedient to God, and we're called to be obedient to the church.
I mean, that this was earlier in the year. That it was the gospel where the Lord said, like, if you love me, you will keep my commandments.
Correct.
Like, our obedience to his commandments is an expression of the love that we've received for him, and that we have for him.
It's also an imitation of Christ, who was obedient to the Father.
He said, I was obedient to the will of my Father, and I ask you to do the same. So.
Yeah. So, and this is where the sort of, does that mean that we have to like blindly pretend that we know everything and that everything is like makes sense? No. But there's a difference between asking questions of like, I don't understand this, where the disposition is, but I believe the church is right. But I don't understand. So like, I'm wrestling, I'm struggling. So can we talk about explain to me? Okay, you explained it to me. I'm still not sure, but I trust. I'm giving my trust to the church and to Christ, versus like, no, I'm skeptical. The church is probably wrong, so I'm going to figure. That's very different to me. And I think that that's an attitude, that obedience to the church and to what she teaches through the guidance of the Holy Spirit is is the disposition of holiness.
Yeah.
We don't get to create it.
No.
It's not ours to create, and we're invited to participate in these sort of things. So yeah, ask questions, these sort of things, but the sort of disposition ought to be one of trust and reliance on the church and the Holy Spirit working through the church. So I think that's like, incredibly important. And if we approach with this sort of modern skepticism that like, I know better, it's like, well, you don't. Sorry.
Yeah, I think there's when we're talking about skepticism and just questioning, like once again, we really should question. That's how we learn. That's how we grow in the faith is to question this. Is like, and this is not uncommon even throughout all of the Old Testament and even into the Gospels and the New Testament. Like people had to ask questions. Like, Lord, what do I need to be saved? Okay, you must be born again in water and the Spirit. Okay. Does that mean I have to crawl back up into the womb? Like, what are you talking about here? Yeah. Like, there are questions. And so I never fear from that. And this kind of brings up for me the figure of the Apostle Thomas, right? Thomas kind of carries that moniker of doubting Thomas, and as if it's a pejorative thing. I don't necessarily think it is. I have a different take on Thomas as the doubter. So Thomas in his life, he missed the first appearance of the resurrected Lord. He wasn't there. I don't know. Nobody knows what he was doing. He maybe overslept, or he was out maybe running to 7-Eleven, getting a hot dog or something. Yeah,
that's a throwback.
Yeah, it is. Okay. For those who know. But he missed the first appearance of the resurrected Lord to the apostles, and then they tell him about it. He's like, I don't know about that. Like, I saw that man crucified. And then he says, unless I put my finger into the nail marks and my hand into his side, I will not believe. And so that's a unique kind of doubt, right?
Yeah.
So somebody's proclaiming the resurrection to him, and he says, he puts up this barrier. Unless these things happen, I will not believe. Now, that's different than just questioning, right? To say, what do you mean? Stronger. That's very strong. That's a definitive statement there. And I think that's where if we're talking about doubts and questions and skepticisms and this whole kind of swirly-murly mix of things in our heads, it's okay to question, but when you present your things and these doubts as definitive, I will not believe, that's doubt, right? That's a barrier and a separation there. And then the Lord appears later on and turns directly to Thomas and says, "You put your fingers here, put your hand here," right? And so you see the Lord approach Thomas in his doubts precisely where he said he would not believe.
Yeah.
And then Thomas makes a beautiful act of faith, my Lord and my God. So he moves from doubt, a definitive doubt, to a definitive act of faith.
Right.
And the Lord meets him and encounters him there. So I don't ever fear when people say, "Oh, I'm doubting," or "I have doubts about my relationship with God," or whatever it is. It's like, yeah, that's okay. But those doubts should lead us closer to Jesus.
Yeah. I think that like when you say that it should lead us closer to Jesus, what kind of comes to mind is like, well, okay, so if I'm doubting, if I have these doubts, whether they're as extreme as Thomas or whatever they might be, they're our own, kind of experience sometimes of our relationship with God. It like immediately begs the question, even like sitting in the confessional and hearing somebody say like, I'm struggling with it, whatever.
Yeah.
Like it immediately begs the question, even if they don't ask explicitly, like, how do I fix it? Like, what's the remedy?
Yeah.
Move from like, as Thomas moved, I will not believe unless, to my Lord and my God. Like, how do I fix it? Right. And the answer is you don't.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. I mean, we are called to remain like faithful and persevere. So what do? We continue to frequent the sacraments. We continue to engage our Lord in prayer and show up in prayer and be present to persevere. But it's through that perseverance that God works on us, that he bestows his grace, that he heals, that he transforms. And I think what your point about like that we come to believe like through doubt, that we can be led, whether it's like with doubt or pain or hurt or like struggling with a particular sin or whatever it might be, there's a temptation to think that like once this is fixed, then I will be holy, then I will be happy, then I will engage. Yeah. But actually, it's not that our Lord causes our pain, our doubt, these sort of things, but it's certainly true that he allows it. But it's also certainly true that he's present in it.
Yep.
And those circumstances of our lives, as you said, become what, like the catalyst or like the whatever, the field of our continued conversion.
Yeah.
So we can't look at doubt as like, okay, yeah, do I believe, like, is God listening to me? Why am I suffering so much? Like, it's God. Well, I don't know why all of these things, but what I do know is that the Lord loves you.
Yeah.
And that he is with you. And that whether or not like my emotive or psychological or intellectual whatever is matching up to what I want it to be with respect, like, it doesn't change who God is.
No.
And our call is to remain faithful in like pursuing him. And this is that trust thing. It's like, okay, so yeah, granted, easier said than done.
Of course.
For sure. But that call doesn't change.
No.
And his grace doesn't change.
And that's it. It's like when we have those doubts, I think the first thing is to actually, acknowledge them as that. Oh, wow, I'm really doubting the Father's love for me.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think I'm worthy of love. And I'll go through these motions, but honestly, I don't think I'm worth it. We'll doubt, did the Lord really, does he really forgive me? Everything else is able to be forgiven, but this one thing, no, that's not, he can't forgive that or whatever it may be. And we can doubt these things that he actually says that. And this is where, when we're talking about our relationship with God, this comes up in my life in a few different ways, but I've found that if we're able to read the Gospels with an eye to the promises that the Lord makes, and I think this is the understanding that when the Lord himself makes a promise, that's a divine promise from eternity that cannot be taken back. We can be unfaithful to their promises, but he cannot be,
Right.
And so if we're struggling with our doubts, quite often when it's not in the doctrinal teaching set, but when it's in the relational reality of we doubt who God is and who we are, then it's good to be to reaffirm the promises that the Lord makes in the Gospels, recognizing that he does love us, that he calls us his friends, that he promises to never abandon us, and that what we bring to him is received and embraced and redeemed. And this is where, when I specifically look at Thomas's life and his engagement with the Lord post-resurrection, is that he moved from doubt to belief, my Lord and my God, by the wounds of Jesus, by actually touching those wounds.
Yeah.
And so I think quite often our own doubts too come from wounds. And to be unafraid of touching our own wounds and actually placing them in contact with the resurrected wounds of the Lord.
Yeah.
And so when we come to those doubts, I think a lot of people, like you said, we want the solution. We want the answer because we are thinking it's an equation or we think it's linear or whatever it may be.
Or it's just painful. Yeah.
Yeah. And how could a good God let this happen? And I doubt that he even exists. I doubt he even gives a rip about me or all of these things. Like, how could this happen? That's real pain. Those are real wounds. Yeah. And it's deep. But I think the first step is to acknowledge that is a source of our encounters with the Lord, but then to put those in contact with the wounds of Jesus as well.
Yeah. I think what you're saying too, the promises of our Lord, to put them in contact with reality.
Yeah.
Because I think we often get trapped in our own headspace.
Totally.
Where we doubt and we kind of look at things through a particular lens, and like it kind of like snowballs in ways. And I think engaging with reality, and what I mean by I'd like two like ways stand out to me.
Absolutely.
First is like looking back at my past, and how God has worked in my life. He has.
Totally.
Like to take stock of that, even little things like blessings, friends, good, whatever, or even the way by which like various crosses of my life have like played out and shaped me into for me into the man, to the priest, to the religious that I am today. But also to like, I think we also have to have the courage to like speak to friends. Yeah. And we don't have to like reveal all the inner workings of our hearts, but just be like, yeah, I'm kind of, like this is tough right now, because I think often our friends, other people see the same thing from a different angle and can, encourage, but also point out like, the Lord is the Lord is good and the Lord loves you. And this is how I know he loves you. Me looking at you, like into your own life, how I know that he loves you. And that might not be the solve all or like the fix all.
No.
But it's a good thing. It helps to take stock of what it is that the Lord has done and is doing, whether it's hearing it from another voice or like from your own past and that sort of thing. I think that's important. It's comforting too, and it takes us outside of our own kind of spiral in ways.
So I think we've talked a lot about how doubts can actually help our faith. If I want to be so bold to say that, like that, it's not a huge detriment to our faith, and that we can move from doubt to faith. But how do we do that? We've talked a little bit about this, but also I think we need to talk about the risks in doubting. Yep. So like, how does doubt become actually harmful to us and to our faith and our relationship with God? How does doubt actually hurt and become very problematic?
Yeah, like is doubt a sin?
Yeah,
right?
Basically. Yeah.
It's like yes and no, or can be.
It can, not all the time, but sometimes it can be.
Yeah. I don't know if I would count doubt as an emotion, strictly speaking. Yeah. I think it has like a motive. I think it's an intellectual thing. Like it's something with our mind, whether or not it pertains to faith. And the virtue, faith is a virtue that perfects and works on the intellect. So doubt is not just like an emotion, but it's certainly tied up. I think
it's very emotional.
Correct. Yeah.
Very emotional.
Right. So, what I think is that like when doubt always, I think, runs the risk of being problematic very quickly.
Okay.
I don't think like sitting in a world of doubt is like a healthy thing. Because it's not a healthy and a good thing, whether spiritually, psychologically, both it kind of like leaves us on the precipice of like danger zone, if that makes sense. And
would you say it's a highway to the danger zone?
One might.
I would.
Yeah. One might. Because, and I think that it's ultimately the reason is that we begin to like not believe in ways. And it doesn't need to be like a full renunciation of faith, but like we begin to doubt the promises and not believe in the mercy of God and what, et cetera, which then like begins, when we don't believe or have faith or trust in something, it changes the nature of the relationship, our investment, our desire. So like those sort of things. Does that mean that like persistent doubt or struggles with the faith are sinful? No, I don't think so. But it's sort of like, well, how do then we engage in our relationship with Christ? Like, how is that put into action?
Yeah.
Like whether in thought or deed. But that's sort of the question that I ask.
Yeah, I think when it comes to doubt, I think, what do you do with it? Like you kind of use that phrase, do you just sit in your doubts and things? I was like, that's actually a really good, I think a lot of people just sit in their doubts and let it spiral, and they just sit there. But if doubt has motion to it, then that's a different thing. Like if the doubts are like, oh, I really don't doubt that I struggle with this relationship, or I doubt this truth or this aspect of God, let me move to him then. Like, let me actually bring this doubt to him.
Yeah.
That's a different thing. But if we just sit in ourselves and kind of sit in the cesspool that is this like doubt of that, and then I think that's where it really becomes problematic, because it's hard to get out. It becomes
a distraction rather than like a way by which we can still attempt to engage.
And I think that's why I was kind of giving the advice of like, I think the first step is to acknowledge I am doubting this.
Yeah.
Because I think until we acknowledge that, it will have this kind of authority over us and just like spiral us out of control. And we just get stuck in that cycle of just sitting in the doubts. So I think, the first step is to acknowledge like, oh, I actually doubt that aspect of God's love for me.
Yep.
Or I doubt this reality. Now what do I do with it?
And I think in that too, there's a difference between, and it's good to acknowledge, like I don't feel that aspect of God's love for me versus I don't believe in that, like, right, with God's mercy, like his forgiveness. Like I don't feel that I'm forgiven, and I don't feel that I can be forgiven, but like
I know
I know that I am.
Yeah.
So there's a disjunct between that and it's where, that's and I think that's often kind of where we are. It's like the doubt of feeling and like the doubt of like the truth of a matter.
The lack of feeling, the doubt that the reality is there, and I think that's really good. So I think as we, kind of have broken this open and shown some aspects of both doubt or the differences between skepticism and our engagements with it, the positive and the negative aspects of it, is, okay, 25 minutes from now, somebody walks up to you and says, Father Jacob-Bertrand, I need to talk. Like, I am doubting. How do I deal with this? Like, I mean, where do we go from this? Like, do you yell at the person? It's a similar question to what we started the episode off with, but now, like, having a better understanding with doubts, like, how do we even help ourselves through this?
Yeah, I think it is. There are a couple aspects, and we've kind of hit on them a little bit, but like to kind of summarize.
Yeah, exactly.
The first is like to persevere, to pray for that grace of perseverance, and that's like regular, like mass, confession, prayer life, just showing up, trusting that the Lord is working, and or at least giving the space for Him to work. The second is to have conversations, whether that's like with a friend or a priest or whomever. And I think we've talked about that. And I think that a third thing here is that it's like to recognize that it's okay.
Yeah.
Not to be sort of swallowed up by it, but like, yeah, it's okay. It's fine. As long as we persevere, as long, it's okay. Don't worry.
I think that's to me is like the number one thing, is just not to let it become a mountain of something. It's like, we're not trying to make mountains out of molehills here, and I don't want to be dismissive of it, but I do want to downplay it. It's like, you have doubts, good.
Yeah,
we have all had doubts in our faith.
Yep.
Like, now what are you going to do with it? Like, what's the next step?
Yep.
Like this crisis of I doubt. It's like, okay.
CMS.
Yeah, what's the next step? What are you doing with that? And to me, is like to keep the focus on perseverance, like you were saying, and that means to kind of downplay it, but then just what's our next step?
Yep.
What do we do with that? And like I said, that may take more time in prayer. That's going to take talking with friends, talking with a priest to work through all of it. Like I said, I don't want to dismiss it all.
Right.
But it is about, let's not just sit in this and like be this catastrophic moment. It's like, let's move through it together.
Makes sense to me.
Cool. Well, thank you to all of our listeners, and thank you to you for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. Please follow us and like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and every other social media platform that we are on. I don't know all of them, but they're out there. We're there. Please like and follow. Like, follow, subscribe, and give us a 5-star review. It really does help us out, and we appreciate reading the comments. And if you would like to donate to the podcast, you can do so through our Patreon, which is linked in the description in the show notes. You can also follow links in the description and show notes to shop Godsplaining merchandise and to get more information on upcoming events. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Father Jacob-Bertrand, would you say that you're optimistic about this subscription appeal?
No.
Would you say that you're optimistic about anything?
No.
Well, I am. Folks, go ahead and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We'd greatly appreciate it. Cheers.